So next up we will have Dr. George Hume Cook, who is an independent theatre practitioner / researcher and performing arts pedagogue. He has taught theatre and performance studies programs at a variety of higher education institutions. And his core research strands are sound and orality, phenomenology of attention, theories of acting, performance and place, theatre phenomenology, performance philosophy, aesthetics of atmospheres. And he's also the author of the book Theatre and Oral Attention, which was published last year. Is it correct? Yes. And the book was selected as Book of the Year by Times Higher Education. And he's giving us a presentation called Paying Attention to Design Sound. So please welcome Dr. George Hume Cook.
Kiitos. Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to attempt some Finnish. Hyvää huomenta. Kiitoksia professori Jari Kapiseli ja tiedeyliopistolla on ilo olla täällä. Okay, more or less. Thank you. First of all, and to kind of resonate with what Serge von Arx was talking about, I want to give you 3 words to think about on the macro. They are Welt or world, attention or attending, and perception. Okay? World, of course, this is the world of sound, but it can be anything, environment, attending, and then perception. That's just the macro. Okay, so this is my presentation. So, a designed auditory occurrence is always a different experience than auditory perception in day-to-day life. Yet what precisely is designed sound, and what is it to experience a designed auditory occurrence? So, design, of course, resonates with the idea of manipulation, okay, and also, of course, dexterous contrivance. Now, how do we translate this into sound? This is part of my book, chapter 2 of my book. I look at this. Indeed, this lecture presentation, thank you, Kiitos, will be partly based on chapter 2 from the book. So, designed sound is not only sound that has been carefully crafted, but that is intended to shape or manipulate the experience of the percipient. My intention here is to attend to design sound within the context of theatrical performance. We are therefore dealing with sound that has been designed to be perceived aesthetically, that is, with sound as an aesthetic object. It's important to make you aware of the fact that my work began by looking at radio drama. I don't have time to show you a fragment from a radio play at this juncture, but I began by attending to radio drama, and I discovered a number of interesting things about that in relation to our perception of that soundscape. Although the radiophonic soundscape is immutable, it is not immutable in terms of perception. We are able to reshape what we attend to or perceive in relation to radiophonic sound. So that's what was my starting point. I then translated that into theatre. Quickly though, singers' attention is key. I must begin with that. So Aesthetic experience, okay, the entire attention of the subject is oriented toward perception, and the materiality of this object is destined to elicit their perception and to efface itself before the triumphant sensuous element. So this is from Michel Dufresne, and this is a very important quote. As we can see here, attention and aesthetic experience are intimately interwoven. Indeed, what distinguishes the aesthetic object from the ordinary object is precisely that it demands attention. Moreover, and as Lindt has made clear, aesthetic objects are not merely illuminated by attention, their very structure and texture are both constituted and made intelligible by discriminating attention. So in other words, this links in part to what Serge was saying, how we perceive or how we attend shapes what we perceive. How we attend shapes what we perceive. Attention is not just something, a cognitive faculty of the mind, it's an engagement with the world which does something and shapes our experience. So, theatre sound design not only demands, but manifestly manipulates attention. And in doing so, this shapes our experience of sound in theatre. Seeing as attention is such an important part of my work thus far, I'll just quickly take you through the theory. So, from spotlight to sphere. Obviously, we tend to think of attention, or William James, his notion of attention being a spotlight upon a stage wherein there is darkness all around apart from that moment. A chap called P. Sven Arvidsson, drawing from Gervish's work, has the notion of a sphere of attention, which is where the relationship is much more dynamic, and we're looking at aspects of the attentional sphere as opposed to a spotlight. So attention is dynamic. Okay, that's a key point to bear in mind, and attention shapes the phenomenology of what we perceive. This is Arvidsson's attentional sphere. You can see there are three parts to it. We're trying to look at how these aspects of the attentional sphere are interrelated in terms of experience. This is part of my work in a way which I explore throughout the book. So we have thematic attention, the center, we have the context of attention, we have the margin. These are the aspects of the attentional sphere, and a key word there is process, so process of attending. We're looking at the processual nature of this. So it's been said by F. Joseph Smith that the heart of phenomenology is in sound and listening. I move away from that personally, and I prefer to go with the idea that the phenomenological attitude is not one of listening, but rather is a particularizing mode of attention. So phenomenology is basically all about attention. It's a particular way of going about attending to the world of perception and attempting to isolate a certain aspect of experience. So, I'm now then moving on to sound in theatre and our perception of that. So, sound in the theatre, in stark contrast to radio, is designed for and within a particular space, for a particular performance and for a particular audience who, by means of their attendance, contribute to the phenomenal nature of the sonic environment. The theatregoer, furthermore, is usually positioned at a fixed point in theatrical space. Yet, as I will demonstrate later on, sometimes the particularities of where one is positioned in the theatre can phenomenally affect the intended significance of sound as designed. In the theatre, and unlike in the case of radiophonic reception, there is always the inevitable possibility of sound to go astray. Manipulating sound. 21st century sound design has the capacity to manipulate the perception of the audience in unprecedented ways. Mark Lamos has even gone so far as to suggest that theatre sound design is changing the way we listen. So he's saying here that we listen differently these days, and this is very, very much to do with what sound design these days is doing. Now, a very important, if not key figure in my process as a scholar has been Professor Ross Brown, whose book Sound 2010 is groundbreaking and without which I wouldn't have been able to proceed. Ross has provided an extremely useful framework for an initial sort of exploration, investigation of how it is to perceive sound in theatre. So this is sort of an aspect of Ross's theory, which basically is the idea of dramaturgically organized noise over and against theatrically organized hearing, which in a way is a relationship between engagement, what he refers to as engagement, and distraction. Building on this idea, I prefer to go with the notion of dynamic embodied attending in the world. As opposed to a matrix of distraction, I tend to focus on the processes of attending. And I also introduce a third category to Ross's twofold theorization there, which is what I refer to as theatrically disorganized noise, which I will come to a bit later on. So, sonic stealth. Sound has a unique ability to put perception in play as a result of its propensity to go unnoticed. Operating undercover or by stealth, sound creeps in through the back door of perception, stealing our experience from under our ears. To steal means both, in English at least, means both to take without permission and to move without making a sound. The notion of stealth, as exemplified by the iconic stealth bomber of the Cold War era, engages in the latter to achieve the former. Contemporary theatre sound design, so it would appear, is moving in a similar direction. The sound designer can sneak things up on audiences undercover of what they are seeing. This is Paul Ditti here speaking. One of the most popular and sophisticated means by which design sound in theatre is used to shape the audience's auditory experience is through the use of false sound beds. Here we have Gareth Fry, who gives you an idea of what he means by this. I'll just let you have a quick look at that. So this is using sound to affect our perception of sound in a way. Whilst the audience notices that something has changed after the gun goes off, the cause and nature of this ontological and phenomenal shift remains indeterminate. Fry's example not only provides a useful means of demonstrating the interplay between dramaturgically organized noise, the sound of the gunshot, and theatrically organized hearing, the use of false sound beds, but also problematizes a straightforward distinction between attentiveness and distraction. In Fry's example, it is the sound of the gunshot that draws attention away from the act of scratching out the false sound bed. Design foreground and background sound, thus working together to manifest a particular register of experience and to bring about a particular mode of attentiveness. Attention would thus seem to play a central role in the efficacy of sonic stealth. False sound beds are created by playing back a recording of the ambient sounds of environmental space that we tend ordinarily not to notice. Since background noise is by its nature usually on the fringes of our attentional radar, we tend to forget that it exists altogether. Hence, when this manufactured or false ambient sound is suddenly switched off, a range of intriguing and a highly dramatic registers of experience are brought into being. The reason for this, I propose, is connected to the relationship between thematic attention and its wider attentional context. Our experience of sound as an aesthetic object is always dependent upon the phenomenal and attentional context in which it is given to reside. So I'm now going to move on to Kursk, which is a piece by Sound and Fury, which sort of produced and performed in 2009, which expressly stages or works with the act of listening in theatrical performance. Confusing sounds, unintended oral ambiguity in Kursk. As my experience of attending Sound and Fury's Kursk illustrates, not only does theatre sound design direct the ear to listen with more care, as Lemos has proposed, but can play with the very workings of attention, and as a consequence, manifests a sense of dis-ease, unfamiliarity, and tension. So in other words, it's not just simply playing with our perception or playing with how we're listening, but that in turn actually affects us on an ontological level. So there we have semiotics and phenomenology, in a way, entwining. I don't have much time to introduce Sound and Fury at this juncture, but they are a pioneering theatre company who I believe won the Prague Prize, I think, in 2012. So they're really very at the forefront of British theatre and indeed sound design. Staged from the perspective of a British submarine in the Arctic Circle, Sound and Fury's Kursk centers on one mission: to monitor the operations of Oscar II class submarine Kursk, the submarine for the 21st century, which of course tragically sunk to the bottom of the Barents Sea in I think the year 2000 or 2000 August. That's correct. Whilst the quality of the script, the accuracy and detail of the technical jargon, and the quality of the acting did much to situate the piece, it was the design that did most to get the audience effectively and attentively on board. Through the surreptitious use of design sound and by situating the audience within the disciplined listening environment of a sonically represented submarine, the most advanced listening machine in the world, Kursk prompted both crew and cast alike, an audience, to carry out acts of sonic surveillance. Here we can see a few pictures here from the piece. There's the skipper and his coxswain, other members of the crew there. This is the main scenographic sort of image here. As you can see, the audience were arranged within the space and also going sort of in the upper area of the space as well, on this scaffolding which was arranged. Yet, despite the intentions of design, such acts of stealthy listening inevitably lead to sonic coincidence and confusion. During Kursk, there are 3 occasions each increasingly tense, where a strange, unidentified, rhythmical clicking sound is brought to our attention. Eventually, it comes to light that this spatially indeterminate, indefinite noise is actually the sound of the navigator knocking his wristwatch against the wall of the lavatory cubicle whilst masturbating. More especially, the sense of oral ambiguity that this sound sets in motion is embodied in the act of listening. I will now give you a phenomenological sort of account of my experience of attending this piece, written in the first person present. Standing to the left of a shower unit placed in front of a row of bunk beds that lie against the wall behind me, I suddenly find myself at the center of spectatorial attention. Shower time. Being at the near deafening epicenter of Coldplay's Yellow, to which the sailors sing along in unison, I am suddenly jostled out of the way by Donnie Mack, the radio operator, played by Gareth Farr, and the plainsman, who is played by Tom Espiner, who barges past me and jumps into the shower. After a moment of banter, I notice a strange clicking sound teetering on the border of thematic attention. At first, there is a sense in which the sound of the sailors singing, the familiar strains of Coldplay, the sound of the shower, together with this new arrival, the strange clicking sound, form a sonic ensemble. Finding myself attending to nothing in particular, I am momentarily caught up in the general euphoria. I am, so to speak, one of the boys. Then, glancing to my right, I notice the submarine's commanding officer, otherwise known as the boss, played by Lawrence Mitchell, trying to tell us something. I stumble upon the words clicking sound, stop the singing. As commanded, I begin to pay closer attention to this seemingly banal sonic percept. All of a sudden, it seems as if every perceptible sound has been switched off, except one, that regular metallic clicking sound. This sound seems to engulf the whole space, and the more I listen, the more monstrous it becomes. At this moment, I notice that my thematic attention is occupied by the coexistence of both the clicking sound and the source of the clicking sound, which is ambiguously present as absent. For a second, I experience a kind of attentional dyspraxia. It feels as if my body, not unlike the clicking sound, is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. So this example demonstrates the ways in which theatre sound design can manifest theatrically effective experiences, such as a sudden feeling of uncertainty and equivocation. It is important, however, to recognize the specificity of sonic effects. In this case, the strange clicking sound was not only ubiquitous, but momentarily produced an experience of ubiquity. To make that a bit clearer, so this is basically, I'm drawing here from Algerard and Torg theory on this particular phenomenon that we can see. That's that. To come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time can be described as ubiquitous. They do not necessarily create a ubiquity effect as such. Throughout Curse, for example, there was a constant background drone of the submarine underway. I experienced this sound to be ubiquitous since I knew that there was no localizable source. Moreover, since I had no reason to question the location of its source, this sound did not produce a ubiquity effect as such. The ubiquity effect, in other words, is based on the paradoxical perception of a sound that we cannot locate, but which we know is actually localized. Furthermore, the uncertainty produced by a sound about its origin establishes a power relationship between an invisible emitter and a worried receptor. Correspondingly, it's my proposal that the clicking sound only became a truly strange sound as a result of the ways in which my attention was phenomenally manipulated at this moment by the use of sound as designed. Background sounds can momentarily become experientially ubiquitous where there is an erasure of other sounds, such as, for example, the appearance of the drone at night when neighboring sounds fade, rather like last night's soundworks that happened on a number of occasions when there's either a sort of a sudden drop in the sound levels. We then become much more attentive, of course, to other sounds. It piques our attention. Consequently, a background sound will only produce a ubiquity effect at the moment of its emergence. In a similar way, the clicking sound in the above scene was only given to sound strange as a result of the sudden and intentional changes to the sonic environment within which it coexisted. More precisely, the clicking sound only produced a ubiquity effect as a result of the ways in which it caught my attention at the moment of its emergence. That is, the moment when the prevailing sound field, consisting of the sound of the shower, singing, talking, and so on, was instantaneously and stealthily faded out. Thus, above all, the example demonstrates how thematic content, in this case my perception of the clicking sound, is phenomenally shaped by a wider attentional and material context, in this case the background sounds of the sub underway. In short, the incursive emergence of the strange clicking sound not only piqued but put a spanner in the workings of attention. The strange indeterminate sound that was heard during this moment of curse was unambiguously an intended sonic component of the design theatrical environment. More specifically, from the moment of its emergence and assisted by the performed reactions of the cast crew, it was clear that the clicking sound was designed to be ambiguous, and as such, its ambiguity was experienced intra-diegetically, part of the piece. However, by exploiting the spatial and ontological ambiguities of oral perception, and by training us to listen more attentively to the sounds that we hear, contemporary theatre sound design actually increases the chances of rendering unintended noise as meaningful. This is the idea I'm returning to later on about theatrically disorganized noise is what I'm calling it. For example, at several moments during the performance, including the period of time when the captain and crew were listening out for the strange unidentified clicking noise, the sound of various creaks and groans could be heard, emanating indeterminately from various parts of the vessel. When an audience cannot be entirely certain whether a siren or a drip or an appliance hum or noise or even an echo is a real part of the auditorium environment, it enjoys the performance in a heightened, bristling state of oral attentiveness to its surroundings. That's a quote from Ross. Similarly, being genuinely confused as to whether these metallic creaking sounds were part of the sound design, I scanned the environment for clues. Upon finding out that these sounds were in fact the sounds of the gantry, straining under the weight of the audience, I was nevertheless able to accommodate them within my attentional sphere. By sheer coincidence, these unintended creaks made a significant, though serendipitous, contribution to the meaning of this moment. Theatre sound design promotes the rhetorical belief that the sound designer is, in quotes, responsible for everything the audience hears. Such a position, however, is unsustainable since oral ambiguity and attentional playfulness are present from the moment of sound's conception and perception. Indeed, it is precisely this equivocality between sound as intended and sound as attended that makes theatre sound theatrical. Whilst a sound designer might attempt to purge the performance space of such irrelevant, unwanted noises, it is these ambiguous, confusing sounds that often serve to heighten theatrical experience. So, moreover, not only is theatre unable to completely control and constrain the production of significant meaning, but this phenomenal leakage between intended and unintended meaning is motivated, at least in part, by what we do. Attention shapes or attending shapes what we perceive. Unlike in the case of radio drama, where sound is the radio play, in the theatre, sound is nothing more and nothing less than a component of the overall experience. In the theatre, sound and sonography are phenomenally enmeshed, and what we see plays a vital role in shaping our perception of what we hear. So, I would now at this point like to look at voice, begin to look at the phenomenon of voice in theatre, having looked at sound design in a larger sense. Now I want to sort of focus on the voice. I'm going to look at two different pieces for this in this regard. One is Robert Lepage's Lip Sync, Act 5 of that. And also I'll be looking at Shunkin by Complicité. In particular, I'd like to look at playback sound and how this affects our perception of voice and also our perception of sound. So, Robert Lepage's Lip Sync, I think it premiered in 2008. I attended it both at the Barbican and also in Spain. Part of my practice was to attend pieces a number of times. So, for instance, I attended Kursk 7 times in total, okay, to try and get at what I was encountering. This is the cover of my book, which is also what I'm going to be using for this particular example. In theatrical performance, the sonorous dimension of voice is manifestly brought to our attention not only as a result of actorly technique, but also as a consequence of the specialized listening environment that theatre uniquely affords. Theatre, as Liz Mills has declared, offers an invitation to hearing the voice as different or distinct in itself, or to reading the text that is the sound of sound. It's therefore perhaps unsurprising that a growing number of theatre practitioners have consciously sought to explore the phenomenon of voice as sound. An emblematic example, of course, being Lepage's Lip Sync. At the beginning of Act 5, subtitled Marie, and through the use of playback sound, microphones, projection, and voice recording, a sequence of dramaturgically organized noise was produced that not only transformed the vocalic utterance of the performer into a kind of musical score, but also motivated varying acts of oral juggling. Marie is seen sitting at a table, center stage, and looking at a laptop. Having recently received brain surgery, her doctor informs us that she is left with aphasia and hence unable to speak. Behind her, a voice graph is projected from her laptop onto a huge projection screen. In the sequence that follows, the audience experiences the creation of a curious composition composed in real time. Marie begins to make a series of vocalic ejaculations resembling something between singing and speaking. These sounds, which are recorded and passed through her laptop, are not only heard but seen in their visual scientific reincarnation as frequencies on the voice graph. With this initial baseline laid, Marie stops recording and starts again, using the sonic backdrop, or cantus firmus, as the basis for producing a descant upon which it is overlaid. This is repeated 2 more times, so that by the 4th time she improvises over this vocal score, a piece of 4-part harmony is produced. This section of lip sync, like so many other moments in the performance, which by the way lasted for 9 hours, 9 acts, 9 hours, yeah, lots of work, not only manifested the voice itself as an acoustic image, but equally invited the audience to attend to the role played by listening in the shaping of perceptual experience. Furthermore, by performatively staging the relationship between voice, speech, and language, lip sync invited the listener spectator to engage in complex and inherently playful attentional maneuvers. So again, resonating with Serge's point, in a way, you're leaving things open. Perception itself, of course, is left open. So we play a part in enacting what we are perceiving and encountering. In attending the above section from Scene 5, I was manifestly motivated to engage in varied acts of what might be referred to as oral juggling, where a number of oral percepts are simultaneously in play. This phenomenon, in some respects, resonates with Arguyard and Torg's notion of sonic metamorphosis, namely a perceptive effect describing the unstable and changing relations between elements of a sound ensemble. As Arguyard and Torg explain, an absence of perceptive attention allows each sound to be heard simultaneously, with no preference or particular attention. It prevents the listener from fixing his or her attention on a particular sound source. In a similar way, in paying attention to sound, voice as sound, in the above example, I experienced the oral jouissance of switching from attending the sound sequence as a sonic melange, whilst simultaneously paying attention to the individual components within this orchestration. I also experienced what I refer to as the play of listening. I was aware of movement, not just at the level of temporality, namely the sound of music, the music sound passing through time, but also on a physical level. This is my notion of stretching ourselves. Actually, attending involves movement between percipient and world, Welt. Moreover, the existence of the visual embodiment of the sounds played a crucial part in the experience of listening. As Tim Ingold has proposed, it is the very incorporation of vision into the process of auditory perception that transforms passive hearing into active hearing. The act of listening is never alone. Looking, as we have already seen, always has a role to play in auditory perception, even in the seemingly blind medium of radio, as I have revealed in the book. There are, however, some obvious differences in terms of phenomenology between radio and voice in radio and voice in the theatre. First, when attending the theatre, we look and listen from a particular perspective. In radiophonic reception, however, our perception of sound remains unaltered, irrespective of any objective changes in position. In this respect, radio drama is materially perspectiveless. Moreover, when listening to a radio play, we do not, indeed cannot, experience the actual production of the sounds we hear. since the originating source of the sound or voice is necessarily and unequivocally absent. In the theatre, however, where we are positioned in space, combined with the phenomenal particularities set in play by the technique of dramaturgically organized noise or playback sound, can affect our ability to experience the production of sound, as I will show it in due course. So I will now then demonstrate this or look into this further by looking at Shunkin, complicitous example of Shunkin, particularly concentrating on the notion of the dramaturgical voice. So, a very important theorist figure in, as you know, in sound theory, phenomenology of listening, is Don Eder, the American philosopher. He writes, the dramaturgical voice amplifies the musical effect of speech and fills the stage with amplified sounded signification. Now, of course, I'm problematizing this somewhat, or at least developing this in relation to the specificity of experience. Sourcing is what Paul Arditi has referred to as the holy grail of sound design. Theatre has always been a place where sound, especially voice as sound, has been subject to material and perceptual manipulation. Whilst the voice of the actor conveys linguistic meaning, it equally draws the listener's attention to its existence as sound, as I've just shown you with Don Eder. Yet the contemporary use of playback sound, combined with the displacing effects of where one is positioned in the auditorium, not only troubles the notion of projection, but also our understanding, our understanding of how the dramaturgical voice is perceived. Not only can playback sound firmly manipulate the listener's spectator's perception of the dramaturgical voice, but the act of listening as attention can manipulate the theatregoer's perception of design sound. As my account of complicité Shunkin will illuminate, hopefully, the perspective of the listener-spectator can bring about permanent or temporary occlusions to our visual encounter with the source of the dramaturgical voice, which, combined with the ambiguating nature of vocal amplification and reinforcement, can lead to uncanny instances of acousmatization. Not only can our ears deceive us, but sound design itself can go awry. Good, I'm now at the correct place. So sourcing is key. Sourcing, as Arditi comments, is a difficult business. In the theatre, unlike in the case of radiophonic reception, the voice is not only heard, its source can be seen, and this, as Gareth Fry explains in the next quote, poses problems for the practice of theatre sound design. So this was in an interview with Gareth, took place in 2011. He's commenting here on, as you can see, on our perception of the actor and of the voice in theatre, and in relation to distance, of course, as well. So the main point is that sourcing is very tricky, and of course in the Barbican, huge theatre in London, is especially tricky in that particular environment. So Shunkin, 2009, I must quickly talk about the sound design in there, particularly the use of microphones. So it was arranged with a series of speakers placed on either side of the stage. Each actor had a wireless microphone attached to their head. Radio microphones were only used in order to tackle audibility issues, and hence were primarily employed to provide natural reinforcement. Okay. So this is my notion of theatrically disorganized noise. Whilst vocal reinforcement is intended to improve audibility and intelligibility, there is always the possibility for the audience to misperceive the dramaturgical voice. Such moments of misperception, moreover, inevitably arise precisely as a result of this act of amplification. To show this, I will now move on to looking at Shunkin. This particular scene is where we have Sasuke, who is here, as an old man who slowly walks forward to address the audience. This is at the beginning of the piece, walking forward at the very, very beginning. And this is I will now provide you with another first-hand experience of that encounter, written again in the first-person present tense. Sitting right at the very back, very top of the Barbican, and with a vertigo-inducing drop to the stalls below, I am placed about as far away from the stage as it is possible to be. This sense of being at a distance is compounded by the sonic particularities of my position. This sense of being at a distance, done that, directly in front of me and framed by my line of sight is a concrete rim, which dampens the quality of the sounds I hear coming from the auditorium. Consequently, I had the sensation of being cocooned within a sound world that is somehow discrete from the sonic environment of the theatre at large. The lights dim. I peer down at the stage below. A figure of a man stands out as he walks forward from up stage center. At around this moment, I hear the voice of an old man emanating from the far right-hand corner of the auditorium. At first, I assume that this voice is either of contextual or marginal significance to the attentional theme, namely the bearded man that I see on the stage. This voice, nevertheless, vies vehemently for my attention. Motivated by this curious phenomenon, I scan the stage and the surrounding region for clues as to its source. Then, on paying particularly close attention to the facial movements of the act on the stage, I realize, somewhat incrementally, that this disembodied voice belongs, at least originally, to Yoshi Oyeda, the actor playing Sasuke as an old man. Yet, irrespective of this, of my knowledge as to its originating source, my perception of this voice is still tainted with a degree of spatial and ontological uncertainty. In making a difference between the dramaturgical voice as opposed to the voice in general, Don Eder makes the following statement. The actor amplifies the sounding voice. He projects the voice into the recesses of the theatre. This resonant voice is an auditory aura that impresses in sound. The auditor is not merely metaphorically impressed, but in the perception of the other, he or she experiences the embodiment of the other as one who fills the auditorium with their presence. Eder also states that in the voice of embodied significance lies the what of the saying, the who of the saying, and the I to whom something is said. Yet, in the example that I have previously given, all three of these indexical characteristics were absent from my first impression of the strange voice as perceived. I knew not what the voice said. Being a Japanese, that the actor's utterance was almost entirely incomprehensible to me, from whom it derived, nor indeed for whom the voice was intended. Far from having a sense of embodying the actor's voice or presence, I felt instead an acute sense of flux, ambiguity, and uncertainty regarding the originating source of this vocalic being. Thus, even without the use of playback sound, there is still the possibility for sound to come unstuck from its source. Voice is no exception. As a phenomenon of sound, voice is always on the move and flows through a given environment in irregular ways. Rick Altman has maintained that in theatre, we never have any doubt whatsoever about who is speaking. Our ears tell us. Yet Altman's description of the dramaturgical voice is in part based on the assumption that the actors on stage are voicing naturally, that is, without the aid of amplification. Even then, again, there can be ambiguities. In instances where actors' voices are increasingly amplified through complex speaker configurations, even our ears get it wrong, whilst the use of wireless or radio microphones and playback sound is intended to ensure the actor's voice reaches the ears of the audience, sitting in the most orally occluded regions of the theatrical environment. Sometimes natural reinforcement can increase the chances of misunderstanding. Here I introduce the notion, as you already know, of theatrically disorganized noise. This concept accounts for the unintended, ambiguous, chaotic noise that arises precisely as a result of the ways in which sound has been organized. In the theatre, unlike in the case of radio drama, our perception of an actor's voice is affected by our ability to hear and see its source, namely the actor's mouth. In attending the opening scene of Shunkin, I was temporarily unable to hear and see the originating source of this uncannily disembodied vocalic phenomenon. Okay, I'm running out of time a bit. I was going to comment on the production of sound, but I will now come to my conclusions. So, our perception of design sound is phenomenally affected by what we do, whether that be listening to a radio play, whether that be even, for example, in yesterday's Soundworks, attending that, or indeed at the theatre. Alvin Neuer has the notion of enacting perception. I think it's very, very useful. Think about how attention is involved in our encounter with the world, and indeed our perception of it. So, just sort of summarize that difference. The radiophonic soundscape is materially immutable, though perceptually mutable. Obviously, it's it's given, it's crafted, and it's then mediated through speakers. The theatrical soundscape is both perceptually and materially mutable. After this book, my work now, I was especially fascinated to attend and experience Serge's presentation because I'm now looking at atmospheres. So it was very, very useful and interesting to hear that. Aura manipulation is a two-way process. Whilst the sound designer handles sound in such a way that it manipulates and directs audience attention, correspondingly, the act of attending plays a key role in phenomenally reshaping our experience of design sound. I'm also now beginning to look at what I'm referring to as the 5 A's of my research, which looks at architecture, atmosphere, attention, actor, audience, and the correlations therein. That's my next project. Well, my sort of life project, really, life interest, is to look at how those aspects are interwoven. Intention, intending versus attention, attending. Listening as a playful act of attending invariably subverts the intentions of design. Contra Goffman's notion in relation to radio drama. Done that more or less. Where we are affects our encounter with the voice. In attending theatre, what we attend to aesthetically is not always that which is aesthetically or dramaturgically intended. Indeed, I close with Michael Dufresne. We complete the object of our perception. I'll leave you with that. And indeed, kiitos kun kuuntelitte. Hyvä.
Yes, thank you, George, for really an interesting presentation. And now, are there comments or questions about this presentation? Perhaps then I would like to comment a bit about the your particular strain of phenomenology, because it seems to me that you the attentive phenomenological approach. It's quite much more active, like the traditional notion of phenomenology as a kind of an introspective activity. How would you comment on that?
Indeed, and thank you very much for that question. The first thing, before I respond to that, is to mention that, of course, there are different kinds of phenomenology. Phenomenology is always an attempt. It is also in process, it's ever emerging. Obviously, phenomenology founded by Edmund Husserl, that would be more this concept that it is solipsistic, it is indeed introverted, and so forth. But I think the basic point, of course, is that phenomenology as conceived by Husserl failed, because we cannot utterly, absolutely bracket anything in that way, in the way in which he attempted to work towards. So failure is there, but I think what's interesting is that it's the attempt which is interesting. It's the attempt to describe, which then leads to further sort of avenues of inquiry, in a way to go back to what Serge was saying. So we attempt to in a way to isolate the theme, but then actually we're also describing how that attempted isolation then leads to various forms of content seeping in from the margins, from the context. So to answer your question more directly, I suppose my phenomenological my particular method, I suppose, is inspired in part by Don Ida, people like Alva Noy, who goes with what he refers to as a messier approach, a not so pure approach to phenomenology. But I think that in itself, in a way, is what phenomenology is. You know, that's the problem. Sorry, that's the point, rather. I mean, Merleau-Ponty, key sort of take-home point is that the perceptual something is always within the context of something else, which is why what Serge was saying about size specificity, I think is very interesting. You know, this point about the thing in itself. You know, what is that?
Any other comments or questions? If not, then I would suggest that the round of applause is due to Dr. George Hume. Thank you.